Grace had learned over the years how to sit very still while people decided who she was. It was a skill she never asked for, but mastered anyway. The way her hands rested calmly in her lap while her thoughts raced ahead. The way her face stayed neutral even when every word aimed at her landed like a slap. That night, the dining room smelled of roasted chicken, rosemary, and quiet cruelty. The long oak table was crowded with familiar faces, family voices overlapping, glasses clinking, laughter arriving too easily. It should have felt warm. Instead, it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Grace sat near the end of the table, posture straight, wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, her dark hair tied back neatly. She looked like exactly what they thought she was: ordinary, behind, unsuccessful. And that was the problem. Grace was 29 years old. She lived alone in a modest apartment on the north side of Chicago, paid her bills on time, woke up early every morning, and carried a pass so carefully folded inside her that even her own family had stopped asking questions. On paper, she was unemployed. In reality, she was rebuilding something most people never even knew existed. But paper was all they cared about. Her sister Lily sat 2 seats down, glowing in that way people do when they believe life is finally going right. Lily had always been the golden one, effortlessly charming, socially magnetic, the kind of person who failed forward and still landed on her feet. Tonight she was laughing louder than usual, leaning into the man beside her as if to silently announce to everyone that she had won. His name was Ryan, Lily's boyfriend, the reason for the dinner. Ryan had arrived with confidence dripping from every movement. Designer watch, tailored jacket, relaxed smile, the kind that suggested he had never once doubted his place in a room. He worked in finance, he made good money, and he made sure everyone knew it without ever saying the numbers out loud. Grace noticed how he spoke slightly louder than necessary, how he interrupted gently, but often, how his jokes always landed just well enough to earn approval. He was good at rooms like this. He was good at people like her family. Her father sat at the head of the table, posture stiff, eyes sharp. He had built his life on reputation, on appearances, on the idea that success was something visible and measurable. To him, Grace was an unfinished sentence, one he was tired of explaining. Her mother moved quietly between conversation and serving dishes, offering polite smiles that never quite reached her eyes when they passed over Grace. The disappointment wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be. It lived in the pauses. The conversation drifted from Lily's upcoming vacation plans to Ryan's job, to how competitive his industry was. Grace listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, chewing slowly. She had learned that silence made people underestimate you. It made them careless. So, Ryan said suddenly, turning his body slightly toward Grace, his smile widening in a way that felt rehearsed. Grace, right? She looked up, meeting his eyes calmly. Yes. He chuckled softly, glancing around the table before looking back at her. Lily's told me a bit about you. Grace didn't respond. She waited. Ryan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You're still, he paused, pretending to search for the right word. Between jobs, right? The air shifted. Grace felt it before she heard it, the subtle intake of breath, the anticipation. Still unemployed, right? Ryan added, more clearly this time. There it was. A second of silence followed. Then laughter, not explosive, not cruel on the surface, just enough to make the point land. Someone snorted, someone else smiled awkwardly. Lily laughed too, a little too fast, her hand touching Ryan's arm as if to soften the blow while still letting it hit. Grace didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't look down. She simply took a sip of water and placed the glass back on the table with steady hands. Her father cleared his throat. Ryan didn't mean anything by it, he said, though his tone carried irritation, not toward Ryan but toward Grace. You know how it looks, Grace. You can't keep drifting like this. It makes the family look bad. The words were familiar. They had followed her through holidays, birthdays, casual phone calls. Grace felt them settle where they always did, heavy, but expected. I'm not drifting, she said calmly. Her father waved a hand dismissively. You've been saying that for over a year. Ryan smiled again, sensing an opening. Hey, no judgment, he said, raising his hands slightly. I mean, not everyone is cut out for high-pressure environments. Some people just need more time to figure things out. More laughter. Softer this time, polite, comfortable. Grace watched him closely now, not with anger, but with focus. She noticed the way he avoided specifics when talking about his role, the way he leaned on vague titles and impressive-sounding terms. She noticed how quickly he assumed superiority, how easily he mistook her silence for weakness. Ryan works for a major firm downtown, Lily said proudly. He's doing really well. That's great, Grace replied. Her voice was even, almost warm. Ryan nodded, clearly enjoying the attention. Yeah, it's been a good year. Promotions, bonuses, long hours. But that's the price of success, right? He looked back at Grace. You wouldn't know much about that kind of pressure. This time, no one laughed right away. The comment hung in the air, sharper than the others. Grace felt something shift, not in the room, but inside herself. Not anger, decision. Her father sighed heavily. Grace, please. Let's not make this awkward. Grace almost smiled. She thought back to the version of herself that had once sat in glass-walled conference rooms, negotiating contracts worth more than the house they were sitting in now. She remembered nights fueled by black coffee and adrenaline, the thrill of solving problems others couldn't even see yet. She remembered why she had walked away, and why she had never explained it. She folded her napkin neatly and placed it beside her plate. I'm not making it awkward, she said. You are. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Relax. It's just a joke. Grace nodded slowly. Jokes are usually funny. A flicker of irritation crossed Ryan's face, gone almost immediately. Look, I'm just saying, if you ever need advice, networking tips, something like that, I'd be happy to help. I know how tough it is out there. Grace met his gaze fully now. That's kind of you. He leaned forward slightly. So what exactly is it you're trying to do these days? The question was loaded. Everyone leaned in, waiting for her to admit confusion, failure, embarrassment. Grace felt the familiar pressure, the expectation to shrink, to explain herself into something acceptable. She didn't. I'm working, she said simply. Ryan laughed. Doing what? Grace paused just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then she reached into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around her phone, not yet pulling it out, just feeling its weight. I'll show you, she said. Something in her tone changed the atmosphere instantly. Lily stopped smiling. Her father frowned. Ryan tilted his head, amused but curious. Show me what? Ryan asked. Grace looked around the table once more, at the faces that had already decided who she was. At the family that believed success had only one shape. At the man who thought he was untouchable. Your job, she said quietly. Ryan laughed again, louder this time. My job. Grace finally pulled her phone out and placed it face down on the table between them. Yes, she replied. Your job. And for the first time that evening, the room went completely silent. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. It wasn't the comfortable kind, not the kind filled with anticipation or curiosity. It was the kind that pressed against the ears, that made people suddenly aware of their own breathing. Grace kept her phone on the table, untouched, face down, as if it were nothing more than an ordinary object. That was the part they didn't understand. They expected drama. They expected her to snap, to defend herself, to finally raise her voice. Instead, she sat there like someone who had already finished the argument in her head long before it began. Ryan was the first to laugh again, but this time it sounded thinner. Okay, he said, shaking his head slightly. That was good. I like confidence, but I'm not sure what point you're trying to make. Grace didn't answer immediately. She looked at her father first. He was staring at her now, not with irritation, but with something closer to concern. Her mother had frozen mid-motion, fingers gripping the edge of a serving spoon. Lily's smile had disappeared completely, replaced by a tight expression that suggested she wanted the moment to pass without incident. I'm not making a point, Grace said finally. I'm correcting an assumption. Ryan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. And that assumption would be that I don't know what I'm doing, Grace replied. Her father exhaled sharply. Grace, this really isn't the time. It is, Grace interrupted gently. Her voice never rose. That was what made it unsettling. It's exactly the time. Ryan's expression shifted again, irritation mixing with curiosity. Look, he said, glancing around the table, clearly aware of his audience. If this is about me teasing you, I already said it was a joke. No need to turn dinner into a courtroom. Grace tilted her head slightly. Funny, she said. You mentioned pressure earlier. High-stakes environments, accountability. This should feel familiar to you. Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't follow. Grace flipped her phone over. The screen lit up the table with a soft glow. Notifications, graphs, documents, none of it visible to the others yet, but the movement alone drew every eye. Grace unlocked the screen with practiced ease and slid the phone a few inches closer to Ryan, angling it just enough for him to see. His smile vanished, not all at once. It happened in stages. First confusion, then disbelief, then something sharper, fear, tightly controlled but unmistakable. His eyes scanned the screen too quickly, then stopped. His body stiffened. Grace watched him closely. She had seen this look before. In boardrooms, in offices, in moments when people realized they were no longer in control of the narrative. What is that? Lily asked, her voice small. Ryan didn't answer her. He was still staring at the phone. Grace spoke instead. That, she said calmly, is a compliance audit trail. Transaction linked. Time-stamped. Internal. Ryan's head snapped up. You shouldn't have that. The words came out too fast. Too sharp. Her father frowned. Grace, what are you talking about? Grace didn't look away from Ryan. Your firm, she continued, has been moving funds through a shell structure that doesn't exist on paper. Or at least it didn't exist officially until 3 months ago. Whoever set it up rushed. They reused identifiers. Sloppy. Ryan pushed his chair back slightly. This isn't funny, I agree, Grace said. It's not. Lily looked between them, panic creeping into her expression. Ryan? He swallowed. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Grace tapped the screen once. This account, she said, scrolling with her thumb, is tied to a discretionary pool your team manages. Off balance. You personally signed off on the routing authorization. Ryan stood abruptly, chair legs scraping against the floor. That's confidential. Grace finally looked around the table. You asked what I do, she said. I analyze risk. I follow money. And when I see patterns that don't make sense, I keep going. Her father's voice dropped. Grace, where did you get this? Grace hesitated for the first time that evening, not out of fear, out of restraint. I didn't steal anything, she said. And I didn't break any laws. Everything I have is publicly accessible if you know how to look. Ryan laughed again, but this time it was brittle. You're unemployed, he said. As if repeating it might restore balance. You don't work in my industry. I used to, Grace replied. That landed harder than anything else she'd said so far. Her mother sat down slowly. Used to? Grace nodded. Before I left. Left where? Her father asked. Grace turned to him. A regulatory consultancy you've heard of, she said. You just never connected it to me. Ryan's eyes widened slightly. No, he said. That doesn't make sense. You don't. Grace smiled faintly. You didn't ask, she said. You assumed. Ryan reached for the phone, but Grace slid it back toward herself effortlessly. Careful, she said. You don't want fingerprints where they shouldn't be. The room felt smaller now. The walls closer. Lily stood up. Grace, stop. You're embarrassing him. Grace looked at her sister, really looked at her, and felt something twist in her chest. He embarrassed himself, she said softly. I just stopped protecting him. Ryan's voice dropped to a hiss. You think you're clever? You think this makes you powerful? Grace met his gaze evenly. No, she said. Knowing the truth does. Her father rubbed his temples. Grace, if you have concerns, this isn't the way to handle them. I'm not handling them, Grace replied. I already did. Quietly, Ryan froze. What do you mean? Grace leaned back in her chair for the first time that night. 3 weeks ago, she said, I submitted an anonymous risk report, no names. Just data. Enough to raise questions. Enough to trigger an internal review. Ryan's face went pale. "Lily," whispered Ryan. He didn't answer her. Grace continued, her voice steady, almost kind. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight. I didn't know you were dating my sister. If I had, I might have handled things differently. Or maybe not." "You reported me," Ryan said, incredulous. "I reported irregularities," Grace corrected. "If you're clean, you have nothing to worry about." He stared at her like she'd grown a second face. "You ruined me." Grace shook her head slowly. "No, I just stopped pretending." Her father stood up. "This dinner is over." Ryan grabbed his jacket. "We're leaving," he said to Lily. Lily hesitated, eyes darting between Grace and Ryan. "Is this true?" she asked him quietly. Ryan didn't answer. He walked toward the door. Lily followed, pausing only once to look back at Grace. There was anger there. And something else, doubt. The door slammed. The house felt hollow afterward. Grace sat alone at the table, phone dark now, food untouched. Her father didn't look at her. Her mother sighed deeply. "Why didn't you tell us?" her mother asked. Grace swallowed. "You never wanted to know." Her father turned to her sharply. "You think this makes you better than us?" Grace stood, gathering her things. "No," she said. "It just means I'm done being smaller so you can feel comfortable." She walked out without waiting for a response. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. Grace breathed deeply, the tension finally loosening its grip. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. An unknown number. She didn't answer. Not yet. Grace didn't go straight home after leaving her parents' house. She drove without a destination, letting the city lights blur past her windshield, while the weight of the evening settled into something quieter, heavier. Chicago at night had always felt honest to her. No pretending. No polished smiles. Just movement, consequence, reality. Her phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. Same unknown number. This time, she answered. Grace Cross, a calm male voice said. "This is Daniel Hargreaves." Grace's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I know who you are," she replied. "I assumed you would," Daniel said. "You flagged a transaction cluster tied to Archer and Bloom's discretionary fund. It landed on my desk." Grace exhaled slowly. "Then you know why I'm calling it a cluster and not an incident." There was a brief pause. "You're thorough," Daniel said, "and careful. That's rare." "That's why you noticed," Grace replied. Daniel chuckled softly. "That's also why I'm calling." "You didn't include your name." "I didn't need to," Grace said. "No," he agreed. "But I'd like it anyway." Grace glanced at the skyline ahead. "I'm not coming back," she said quietly. Daniel didn't argue. "I didn't ask you to." They ended the call shortly after. Grace pulled into a quiet overlook near the river and shut off the engine. For a long moment, she sat in silence, memories rising uninvited. Not the dinner. Not Ryan's face. Older ones, glass offices, secure elevators. Names she'd learned not to repeat. Years earlier, Grace had been invisible by design. Not the loudest analyst, not the most charming. But the one people handed the impossible files to when something didn't add up. She had built a reputation on precision. On seeing patterns others missed. On knowing when to stop digging and when not to. She had left that world after uncovering something too close, too dangerous. Not illegal enough to expose publicly, powerful enough to destroy careers quietly. Grace had walked away instead of becoming collateral. She told no one, not her family, not even Lily. Silence had felt safer than explanation. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Lily. Grace hesitated before answering. "What did you do?" Lily demanded the moment the call connected. Grace closed her eyes. "I told the truth." "You humiliated him," Lily said. "In front of everyone." "He humiliated me first," Grace replied, repeatedly. "That doesn't mean you get to destroy his life." Grace's voice softened. "If his life can be destroyed by facts, Lily, then it wasn't stable to begin with." There was silence on the other end. Then Lily's voice cracked. "He won't answer my calls." Grace felt a familiar ache. "I'm sorry," she said. And she meant it. 2 days later the news broke quietly. Not headlines. Not scandal. Just a short internal memo leaked to the wrong inbox. Archer and Bloom had placed several employees on administrative leave pending review. Ryan's name was on the list. Grace read the message once, then deleted it. Her father called that evening. His tone was different now. Measured, uncertain. "You should have told us," he said. "You should have listened," Grace replied. Another call came an hour later. Then an email. Then a message from a number she didn't recognize but immediately knew belonged to Ryan. "You think you won. You don't know what you've started." Grace stared at the screen, unmoved. She typed back only 4 words. "I know exactly." That night, Grace sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, documents spread across the screen. Not revenge. Resolution. She refined her independent work, tightening frameworks, anonymizing reports. She wasn't hiding, she was choosing distance. Power didn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looked like walking away with your integrity intact. A week later, Daniel emailed her again. "If you ever change your mind, the door is open." Grace closed the laptop without replying. Outside, the city hummed on. Grace stood by the window, watching lights flicker in buildings full of people who assumed they understood how the world worked. She knew better now. She always had, and for the first time in a long while she felt free. They always remember the moment differently. Some say it started at a dinner table. Others think it began when Grace pulled out her phone. But the truth is, this story began long before anyone laughed at her. It began the day Grace learned that silence could be sharper than any argument, and patience could become a weapon if held long enough. This is not a story about unemployment. It is a story about underestimation and what happens when the quiet one finally decides to speak. The city woke slowly that morning. Sunlight sliding between buildings like it had all the time in the world. Grace stood by her window, coffee untouched in her hand, watching Chicago move forward without asking permission from anyone. She felt different now. Lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. Ryan's situation unraveled faster than he expected. Investigations never announce themselves loudly. They don't kick doors down. They wait. They observe. They collect. Grace followed the developments from a distance, reading between lines most people skipped over. Archer and Bloom issued statements about procedural reviews and temporary restructuring. Ryan's social media went quiet. His LinkedIn headline changed twice in a week before disappearing entirely. Lily showed up at Grace's apartment unannounced 3 days later. She looked smaller without confidence to lean on. No perfect makeup. No rehearsed smile. Just a sister who didn't know where her future had gone. "I didn't believe you," Lily said, standing in the doorway. "I wanted to. But I didn't." Grace stepped aside to let her in. "You believed what was easier." They sat across from each other in silence before Lily spoke again. "He lied to me about everything." Grace nodded. "He lies to himself first. That's how men like him survive." Lily looked up sharply. "Why didn't you ever tell us who you really were?" Grace took a breath. "Because every time I tried to be more, you all asked me to be less." That truth landed quietly, but it stayed. Their father called later that week. Not to argue. Not to lecture, to apologize. The word felt unfamiliar coming from him. Clumsy and incomplete, but real. He admitted he had measured success too loudly and love too conditionally. Grace listened without interrupting. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing peace over punishment. Ryan tried once more. A voicemail this time. His voice was angry, then desperate, then small. "You think you destroyed me," he said, "but I'll recover. People like you always disappear." Grace deleted the message without replying. Because he was wrong. Grace didn't disappear. She became visible on her own terms. Months later, Grace sat in a quiet cafe, laptop open, sunlight warming the table. Across from her sat Daniel Hargreaves, older now, more careful in the way powerful men become when they realize they were once blind. "You could have ended him publicly," Daniel said. "You didn't." Grace smiled faintly. "That would have been about him. This was about me." Daniel nodded. "You're building something." "Yes," Grace said. something honest. When Grace left the cafe, she walked with the ease of someone who no longer needed approval to exist. She had work now, not a title to impress, not a salary to brag about, but purpose. She chose clients, she chose distance, she chose herself. The same family table looked different months later, quieter, kinder. No jokes at her expense, no comparisons. When Grace spoke, people listened. Not because she demanded it, but because they finally understood the cost of ignoring her. Grace never brought up that night again. She didn't need to. Because the truth had already done its work. Powerful outro, YouTube. They laughed because they thought silence meant weakness. They judged because they believed success had only one face. But they forgot one thing. The quiet ones are always watching. And when they finally speak, everything changes. If this story moved you, remember this. Never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. They might already know exactly how the story ends.